Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our Citrix Summit 2020 highlights webinar. Hopefully everyone's nice and awake and ready for a busy hour we've got planned. So we'll start off with just have a look at a quick agenda of what we're going to be talking about today. So just have a quick overview of what Citrix Summit is and why we're talking about it. We'll go over a little bit about Ultima at Citrix Summit and kind of what we've been up to. We'll go through some updates from Citrix Summit, and to wrap up, we'll have a little chat about security, which was a topic which came up quite frequently whilst we were at Citrix Summit. So hopefully that's going to be of interest to a few of you. So first off, Citrix Summit. So the purpose of Citrix Summit is really for Citrix employees, both sales and technical, and also the partner community, to come together at the start of the year to get an idea of Citrix's strategic direction for the year. So to go over things that they're doing, things they have done, and what's planned for the next 12 months. So the great thing for us is that it gives us a great starting point for the year, gives us a great indication of the direction of travel. Unfortunately, quite a lot of the content that we cover at Citrix Summit is actually restricted by a non-disclosure agreement. So we are slightly limited in terms of what we're able to talk about today, in terms of giving away the secret sauce, really. But what we've done is basically selected a couple of highlights which are kind of in the public domain, which we're able to discuss with you and give you a little bit more information about. So hopefully that's going to be informative, give you some useful pointers, but also if there are any specific questions that you have regarding kind of what Citrix are up to this year, definitely reach out to your account manager. There are some things that we may be able to discuss with you kind of on a one-to-one basis, or if there are any specific areas of interest where you've got some pain points or you've got some challenges that you need to address this year, definitely reach out to us, because worst case, we may be able to arrange a conversation directly with Citrix as well, where they may be able to share a little bit more with you. So what we'll do is have a little look at Ultima Summit. So for those of you who joined us for this webinar last year, you might remember that we were recognised as Worldwide Partner of the Year for EMEA, which was a fantastic recognition for our efforts over 2018 into 2019. So we were lucky enough to be recognised again this year as Workspace Partner of the Year for EMEA. Now, this is a fantastic recognition from Citrix for the efforts that everyone at Ultima has been putting in over 2019. And fundamentally, it's about delivering results for you, the customers. So I think hopefully we've been doing a good job in terms of delivering the value of Citrix Workspace into our customers. So we look forward to continuing to work with you and to deliver excellent results over the next year as well. So that was one of the highlights of our trip. There were several of us. So Citrix Summit was in Orlando, Florida this year. So obviously one of the nicer parts of the world. It's certainly a lot warmer than it is in the UK. But yeah, it was definitely a very busy week, a lot of technical content. So one of the things Citrix have done is they've merged a lot of their internal technical training into Citrix Summit as well. So we were lucky enough to be able to partake in some of the more technical sessions as well. So it's certainly aided us in terms of being able to deliver the level of technical expertise that you'd expect from a partner like Ultima. So we'll start going through a few Summit updates. And again, I'll just mention that if anyone does have any questions, you should be able to add any questions into the GoToWebinar. So I won't jump on those as we're going through, but allowing time at the end, I'll attempt to answer any questions that you may have. So one of the key trends that Citrix have identified in across all enterprises really is the fact that the expectations of the user communities have changed. So the statement "good enough" is no longer good enough is a good summary of the situation as Citrix see it across most verticals. The expectations of capabilities is a lot higher as employees start to distinguish between companies and where human capital is becoming a far more finite resource in a lot of organizations. The ability to recruit and retain skilled workers is becoming far more of a priority. So being able to give those users an excellent user experience is becoming far more of a distinguishing factor between organizations. So where there are a requirement for high levels of skilled workers in an organization, being able to give that excellent level of user experience is becoming far more of a desirable factor for a lot more of the C-level executives. So some of the stats that we've been able to identify from a end user survey in 2019. So 90% of employees with access to good technology say that they feel productive in their day-to-day work. Yet only 38% of employees with access to average technology. That's not even bad, that's just average. So only 38% of employees with access to average technology solutions in their job say that they feel productive. So that's a kind of statement in terms of how much of a difference being able to provide a good level of technology to your employees can make in terms of how engaged they feel in their day-to-day work. So how Citrix are looking to address this? One of the big announcements from Citrix Synergy last year was for Citrix Workspace with Intelligence. So for those of you who may remember, this is the new capabilities that Citrix are adding to their Workspace product. So this is the Workspace delivered as part of the cloud solution. So Citrix Workspace with Intelligence allows you to upshift how you integrate with different applications. So we can see on the screen, we've got a bit of a map in terms of the direction of travel. So in terms of organizing, this is the game that Citrix have been in for the last few years. So with the introduction of Citrix Workspace, we've had the ability to integrate different resources into one place. So we've had the ability to provide a single pane of glass, which gives access to applications, which gives access to your data, which gives access to web and SaaS applications, and be able to deliver those through a unified pane of glass with common set of security policies wrapped around those. So that's what Citrix have been doing with Citrix Workspace for the last couple of years. Now, with Citrix Workspace with Intelligence, we now have the ability to kind of move that further towards the optimized end. So we've got the ability to guide users. So this is in terms of being able to integrate with more than just your virtual apps and desktops. So a lot of you will be in a position where you may be delivering applications to your users through virtual apps and desktops, which gives them a convenient, centralized place to get work done. Now, what we have the ability to do with Citrix Workspace is to be able to take the rest of the application. So these may be things that you may not necessarily be delivering through virtual apps and desktops, or you may already be delivering them with virtual apps and desktops. But this gives you the ability to integrate with those applications, and rather than just delivering them to users the way that you would typically do, it gives you the ability to integrate with them to be able to drive actions in those applications directly from Citrix Workspace. So rather than having to present an entire user interface to a user to get a single function done, with Workspace with Intelligence, you have the ability to target specific actions and present those to users within Citrix Workspace directly. So to be able to drive particular functions, they may not even have to go into the application itself. They'd be able to do that from just Citrix Workspace. Now, you also have the ability to be able to highlight specific events. So this may be changes. For example, if it's a CRM system, it may be the fact that a new customer account has been allocated to you, or it may be the fact that a support ticket has been opened that needs your attention. Now, being able to pull these into Citrix Workspace with a view that this is already where people should be going to get their work done. Being able to highlight the most relevant and pertinent information that users need to be able to get their job done gives the users the ability to just stay in one place, which in terms of time benefits can be quite significant. So rather than having to go trawling through multiple layers of a particular application to just extract the one piece of information they need, being able to surface that to them so they can just see it in an activity feed within Workspace. Now, the automation side of it, again, this comes in terms of being able to drive potentially kind of semi-complex workflows via Citrix Workspace. So where you may need a particular chain of actions to take place. So for example, being able to feed data into multiple systems. So being able to drive that from one pane of glass effectively removes the need for the users to go into the system of record or the application they're trying to work with and just drive the function that they want to do. So kind of classic examples of this would be things like being able to update records, to be able to enter data into things, but also things where it may be a less regular task. So if you think about particular applications, most companies will have in the hundreds of applications. In the larger enterprises, I think the typical number we talk about is 500 applications, with the average user maybe having access to up to 100 applications in that. Now, not every user is going to fully understand or have training on every single application, and yet there may be functions within that they need to use on occasion. So where this becomes powerful is being able to actually highlight the function rather than the particular application. So for example, a user may need to request a holiday, for example. So without necessarily having to know the fact that they use Workday, for example, to manage their HR processes and their holiday booking system, you can just present to the user an action which says book holiday, where they can just select the dates, give a reason, and click submit. Now, they have no idea and they don't need to know what application that's going back into. All they know is that they want to book some holiday. So you can present to the user the option to do that function. So it can simplify the user experience quite a lot, and it effectively leans on a consumerization model. So say, for example, Facebook. So most users with Facebook or Instagram, typically it's a case of you just pick up and use it. They're very focused on user experience and user interface. So they make things as simple as possible. They make things very function driven. So you have specific actions that you can drive from the interface really easily. Now, one of the side benefits of that is not many people need training to use things like Facebook and Instagram, because you can pick them up. They've got clear actions that you can drive from a simple user interface. Now, this is where we want to go with Citrix Workspace, being able to give users those kind of clear actions they can drive, give them clear, relevant, and contextual information from which they can drive actions to give them that simple user experience without the need for all the additional complexity. So being able to highlight the specific functions that they need without having to present the entire application to the user. So Citrix have a goal going forward. So one of the things they mentioned at Singe is that their goal is to effectively give a user a day a week back in terms of productive time. So with Workspace with Intelligence, this is where we can start to use the tools that Citrix give us to be able to drive that level of productivity, to be able to optimize the time that people are spending doing things. So even if we take an action that maybe takes them a few minutes to do, if it's something they're doing 20, 30, 40 times a week, if we can shave that 3 minutes down to 10 seconds, then extrapolated across a year, we're starting to talk about some real time savings, even on the individual basis. But extrapolate that across an organization, and there can be some kind of quite significant time savings across most enterprises. Now, Again, if you're letting people work more efficiently, then this is kind of going down to the bottom of the slide. It's empowering people. It's letting them get on with what they're best at. So it's taking away the busy work, taking away the complexity, and taking away the confusion of kind of quite large and sprawling application estates, and just allowing users to focus on what matters most to them. So that's one of the really powerful things that Citrix have at the moment. So Workspace with Intelligent is available today. So any customers with Workspace entitlements, so Citrix Workspace entitlements, so Standard, Advanced, Premium, or Premium Plus, should now be able to see a MicroApps tile in their Citrix Cloud console. So that's the place that you want to go if you want to get started with it. If you don't have an entitlement for it, but you're kind of interested in getting started, what you can do is you can go to developer.cloud.com/Citrix-workspace. This will allow you to sign up for a 30-day trial of Citrix Workspace with Intelligence. So this is on the developer platform, so it's basically a 30-day test bed that will allow you to get started with it, start looking at how you can integrate Workspace with Intelligence with your applications. It's a 30-day trial, but it is renewable. So you will have the ability to extend that trial for another 30 days before your trial runs out. So this isn't a 30 days and put it in the bin. This is a 30 days at a time, effectively, so there doesn't end up being a load of accounts sat there dormant. So it's kind of going to be targeted at people that are actually using it. But this is the place that you'd want to go if you want to start having a play with that and to understand how you can use it with your applications and how you can start to leverage that within your environment. So just a few tips on the MicroApp side. So one of the important things to understand is that MicroApps within Workspace Intelligence help you solve business problems. So one of the important things that you need to do is to understand workflows from a business and user perspective, to understand where the pain points are, where the low-hanging fruits are. So if there's a particular process that users find repetitive, which they find it time intensive, where you have an application which you can kind of easily integrate with, you can use that as low-hanging fruit to start to demonstrate the value that Workspace with Intelligence and MicroApps can deliver to the business. So identifying common process and tasks that can be simplified is really important. So again, this is only really going to be clear to you once you've actually engaged with the users and engaged with your kind of power users and the business to understand where they see the pain coming from. So this isn't really a technology conversation. This is more of a business process conversation that you need to be having with your organization. So the easiest way to start is by looking at the built-in integrations. So we can see on the screen here, there's kind of quite a few, and at the moment they're largely SaaS-based. There is planned integration in the not too distant future for on-premises applications, so keep your eyes open for a tech preview of that coming soon. But in terms of the out-of-the-box integrations at the moment, we can see we've got some interesting ones in terms of being able to integrate with ServiceNow, which is a common one in a lot of organizations. Concur, again, another incredibly common one. Dynamics CRM, Power BI. Power BI has been a massive grower across a lot of customers, so kind of being able to extract highlights of information from Power BI and kind of push reports into a user's workspace, again, kind of potentially really powerful capability there. And Workday, again, a kind of another common one which we see in a lot of organizations for kind of HR processes. So those are the out-of-the-box integrations, but you have the ability to look at custom integrations as well. So we have in the screenshot you can see on the screen an HTTP connector. So this lets you basically integrate with any application that has an API. So anything which has kind of a REST API, you'd be able to point that HTTP connector at and provide a level of integration there. Important things in terms of how to look to adopt Workspace Intelligent is just be clear in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So this can be a change in terms of how people interact with things. So you need to firstly set some clear goals in terms of what you're trying to achieve with it, and also to understand what success looks like. So be clear in terms of what what your best case scenario looks like. So what is it that you're trying to change? So when it comes to modifying user behavior, it can be quite a complex process, and it does require some kind of change management effort in terms of how users are adopting things. But obviously, what we want to do is just make sure that we have a clear understanding of exactly what it is that you're looking to achieve with Workspace with Intelligence and the problems that you're trying to solve. So once you actually have that deployed in your environment, it's easier to understand whether or not it's delivering the value that you were hoping it was going to deliver, or if you need to refocus your efforts in other applications where you may be able to get better value and deliver more productivity to users. Some more tips. So we mentioned before, the generic HTTP integration allows you to integrate with other applications. So anything which Citrix doesn't have a built-in integration with. And one of the things that you'll be able to find some documentation on the developer site is you can actually create, so if you have development skills in-house, you do have the ability to create your own application-specific integration. So obviously they may be more development intensive to be able to provide those, and obviously Citrix are actively working on increasing the number of integrations that are available out of the box, but you do have the ability to build your own and be able to add those to the system. To use the HTTP integration, an important thing is that you really need to have an understanding of the APIs of the applications that you're trying to integrate with. So being able to read API level documentation and understand how to interact with those is going to be a requirement for providing that level of generic integration. And also understanding the systems of record, so the data structures within those applications. So obviously we're working with the data in those systems, so we're going to be adding things or reading things. So in order to integrate with those, we need to be able to understand where the data is within that data structure that we're interested in. So there's a few requirements there in terms of being able to do that successfully, but either within your own teams or through working with application owners, it should be kind of entirely possible to kind of establish that level of information for the applications that you want to integrate with. So a shameless plug here. So where can Ultima help with Workspace? So we're really lucky in that we've been in a position where we've been working with a lot of these technologies for several years. So through our intelligent automation practice, we've already got a lot of experience kind of working with businesses to understand which processes, when optimized, will deliver the best level of business value. So kind of having a process discovery process. So that effectively is what we're talking about before in terms of identifying what the low-hanging fruit is effectively. So what are the tasks where if we spend some time optimizing those and integrating those with Workspace, what's going to deliver the best value for the business and for the users? So what's going to help user experience? So we've also got the ability to provide automation, integration, and micro-app creation services. So being able to actually deliver the technical side through working with your application owners, through looking at systems of records and kind of providing the integrations to your business applications. So being able to deliver the technical side of this as well as the business side in terms of understanding the processes. So my third point on there is automating the unautomatable. So we've been talking about APIs and how we integrate with applications. Being able to automate things without APIs, now that's a problem. So businesses tend to be really good at buying new applications, adding new services to the catalog, adding new capabilities, adding new applications. Now this is great, but enterprises tend to be really bad at getting rid of the old stuff. So the numbers of applications typically only get bigger, and the long tail of legacy tends to get longer and longer and longer. So a lot of applications in your environment may not have the APIs that we need to be able to directly work with those. Now, this is where Ultima have developed our own in-house solution. So we have some capabilities in a product which is called IA Connect, which can effectively allow you to provide automation for any application, regardless of whether or not it has an API. So if you have applications like this that you're interested in integrating with Citrix Workspace, have a conversation with us about IA Connect and how that can potentially help add automation to your legacy apps and things where maybe they don't have out-of-the-box integrations, or they may not have an API that we can actually interact with. So moving on from Workspace for Intelligence, one of the really interesting things that I like to see at Citrix Summit is around the Citrix and Microsoft relationship. So it's been an interesting year. So there's been a lot of conversation around Windows Virtual Desktop and how that impacts on Citrix. I think the messaging from both Citrix and Microsoft is that effectively there's plenty of room in the sandpit for everyone to play. So there's Windows Virtual Desktop has got some really interesting capabilities. As an entry-level solution, it's definitely something which should be considered. There are some limitations to it, which is kind of expected from a kind of relatively new solution, but there's a lot of development effort going into it. But I think one of the things that's really important to understand is that it's not a Citrix killer. It's not a kind of, right, everyone needs to move to this. The one thing that it has done for Citrix customers is it's actually added a lot of benefits. If you're running workloads in Azure, I think the benefit to doing that is more significant now than it ever has been. So whether it be the ability to deliver Windows 7 with extended support in Azure as part of a WVD entitlement using Citrix, whether it be FSLogix. FSLogix acquisition by Microsoft has been fantastic. The adoption of it has been incredible over the last year, and we're only seeing it continue. So having FSLogix entitlements as part of core Microsoft licensing, again, is a fantastic benefit to a lot of Citrix customers. One of the things which was tweeted about last year was the fact that customers with WVD entitlements are entitled to use hybrid use benefits for workloads running under WVD entitlements in Azure. So that effectively means you don't have to double pay for Microsoft licensing. So if you have your Windows 10 per user subscription, kind of whatever flavor it may be, then effectively you can run Windows 10 based workloads in Azure, but only pay Linux compute rates. So that can significantly reduce your deployment costs in Azure, which makes it then a much more viable platform for kind of like larger deployments, kind of maybe shifting the conversation away from kind of using it for kind of tactical or DR purposes to making it more of a viable candidate for kind of like larger production deployments. So it's certainly an interesting conversation to have around that. So the relationship is strong. The capabilities WVD is adding to Citrix in terms of benefits running workloads in Azure is only adding value for Citrix customers. I think with Citrix and Microsoft's close relationship, there's a lot of alignment in terms of kind of strategic plans and delivery. So the relationship looks strong, and I think the competitive edge between kind of WVD and Citrix will only kind of drive everyone further forward. So it's certainly an interesting space to be looking at, and we look forward to seeing kind of further progress this year. So some of the numbers in terms of Citrix and Azure. So in 2019, there's 4 times as many Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Service customers, so that's in the cloud service, running workloads in Azure since 2018. So that's some significant growth in terms of customers starting to move workloads into Azure and adopting kind of those public cloud platforms. So 80% of Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Service cloud-hosted workloads are running in Azure. So that's a significant percentage. I think kind of with the WVD benefits, that's probably a significant factor in terms of the volume of workloads that are being placed in Azure. Obviously, Citrix provide excellent integration with both AWS and GCP, but the level of enterprise adoption for Azure as their primary public cloud platform is obviously still significant. And with the additional WVD benefits, specifically for running Windows 10 workloads, which is a licensing challenge in AWS and GCP, delivering kind of that excellent level of user experience from a public cloud platform using Windows 10 is something that's at the moment very unique to Azure. So that's why we're seeing such a high volume of users, or organizations even, placing their workloads in Azure as their preferred public cloud. And obviously, we've got the capability with the Virtual Apps and Desktop service to provide additional value over WVD in terms of being able to increase user density, simplify the management, which is a major factor and differentiator between Virtual Apps and Desktops and WVD, and to be able to deliver enhanced performance on Azure as well. So this is where we're seeing kind of the joint capabilities of Citrix and Microsoft delivering a superb user experience whilst also delivering kind of better value to organizations through better density and improved management capabilities. So one of the really interesting things, and I've kind of directly hijacked this from a Citrix slide, so thank you very much, Citrix. So one of the things that Citrix has been working on is just to be able to better communicate to people why Citrix adds more value on top of WVD and kind of where the benefits are. So I won't go through in detail each of these points because I'm quite conscious of time, and these slides will be going out to all of you afterwards, so please do feel free to have a bit of a closer read. But this is just to highlight that there are several kind of fairly key areas where Citrix does add significant value on top of Windows Virtual Desktop. So even down to the fundamentals of HDX technology, so being able to deliver that exceptional user experience when delivering workloads from potentially remote or kind of less ideal locations, so the adaptive nature of the protocols, being able to kind of deliver that first-class experience from the public cloud is really important to customers. And one of the kind of real killer capabilities is just the ability to do hybrid. So one of the limitations people find with WVD is the fact that, again, it's like I say with the long tail, there's typically a need in most organizations to still deliver some stuff from on-prem. Now, obviously, if you're going kind of full bore into WVD, that's great. But obviously, one consideration is that currently is only from the public cloud. So you don't have any ability to be able to deliver that on-prem. Obviously, with Citrix, you've got the ability to deliver resources from multiple locations across kind of public cloud, hybrid cloud, kind of you choose where you want your resources to go. So that flexibility is still really important to kind of most enterprises. So it's definitely an important consideration. So one of the big things that came out last year is the optimization of Microsoft Teams in virtual apps and desktops. So this has been something a lot of people have been waiting for. So Teams adoption across all enterprises has been stellar in the last year. The number of customers that we're working with that are moving from either nothing or moving from Skype over to Microsoft Teams as their kind of central communications hub is significant. So the ability to deliver that from a virtual desktop or kind of virtual app solution is absolutely critical for the strategic plans of most organizations. So it's a real statement, the fact that kind of on Microsoft's website, that it says that Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops will deliver the best experience for Microsoft Teams desktop client with crystal clear voice and video within a virtualized environment. So this is a joint development effort from Citrix and Microsoft, so slightly differently from the Skype for Business optimization pack that you may be familiar with from previous incarnations. The Teams optimization mechanism is jointly developed by both Citrix and Microsoft. So there's some code that Citrix have placed in the VDAs and into Workspace app, but equally there's a development that's had to go on within the actual Teams app itself to enable it to be optimized. So for those of you who've been waiting for it, you may have been kind of aware that Citrix released the capabilities for the Teams optimization slightly before the Teams client itself actually supported the optimization. So that was due to the fact that there's contributions from both ends. So again, it's a sign of Citrix and Microsoft continuing to work closely together to be able to deliver that level of user experience to customers that they need and expect. But now we've got to a point where both ends of the stream are now in place. So the current Teams client will support Citrix optimization. The 1912 release is probably the one that you want to be going for if you want to be using Teams optimization. So for those of you that aren't aware, so 1912 is the version that was released in December. That is the new long-term service release. So if you are adopting a long-term service release track and you want to be using Microsoft Teams going forwards, I'd strongly recommend that you have a look at the 1912 release, because that's going to be the one that gives you Teams optimization. So that's going to give you the best level of user experience if you're using Teams in your organization. So that's something to consider. So one of the other things that was discussed quite broadly at Summit was the availability of performance analytics. So you may or may not be aware that Citrix released security analytics. So security analytics has been around for a while now. So that was more orientated towards identifying unusual behavior in your environment. So it's taking all the data feeds that your Citrix infrastructure can generate. So through virtual apps and desktops, through NetScaler, through access control, through any of the Citrix solutions that you've got deployed in your organization, being able to take data feeds from those products and be able to run them through machine learning processes on the back end to be able to identify differing patterns of behavior. So for example, if a user logs on at 9 o'clock in the morning and goes through a certain set of applications, then it can recognize that that's their normal level of behavior. If all of a sudden you've got an IT user who's logging in remotely at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday and downloading gigabytes and gigabytes of data from like an HR or finance application, it can use those patterns it's recognized to identify abnormal behavior, and you can have some closed loop responses associated with that. So you could say, for example, if I see unusual behavior, I want to restrict a user's access to something, I want to revoke access to certain sets of data, or on the lighter end of the scale, it may be a case of, I just want to send an admin a notification just to say, well, hey, I've seen something unusual, you might want to have a look at this. So security is very much around being able to proactively identify any kind of potential threats or kind of unusual behavior in your organization. So you've got the ability to identify kind of what's good and what's bad that's happening in your environment. So performance analytics is an add-on for virtual apps and desktops customers. So performance analytics provides a similar level of interpretation of your product data. So rather than just giving you numbers that you then have to interpret. So you may be able to see in Director that you've got a particular number of users on a particular server, or you may be able to see kind of individual users in terms of what was their logon time, or kind of have they had any connection failures. But then those are fleeting glimpses of potential performance problems. What performance analytics tries to give you is a more holistic view of your environment performance, and to be able to recommend some potential actions to help you resolve those. So, skip past that. So one of the important aspects is that performance analytics will give you a user experience score. So this is kind of one of the differentiators for performance analytics. So rather than you having to understand every individual metric and kind of how that could potentially impact on your user, what performance analytics will do is it will take all the data feeds that it can get from your monitoring environment in virtual apps and desktops, and look at characteristics such as like latency, login duration, any connection failures or reconnects in there from their connection, and it will then generate a user experience score for that particular user. So it does that user experience score based on a variety of interpretations. So it'll use machine learning, but I think the important thing to understand is it's also contextual. So it's not based on hard-coded metrics. So for example, if your typical log-on duration is 20 seconds, then it's not the case that there's a hard-coded value to say under 30 seconds is good, over 30 seconds is bad. It will learn what is normal for you, and it will highlight any changes in that or any outliers which you may need to be concerned about. So it's important to understand that it is adaptive to your organization, so it will baseline itself over a period of time. So typically about a week, it will learn what's good for you and what's not good for you. So we'll do this based on statistical modeling, and the output is the fact that you'll get a user experience score for a particular user. So you can quite simply identify whether or not a user is based on the metrics that's been captured for them, whether they've got an excellent user experience, if they've got fair user experience, which is could be worse, could be better, or if they've got a poor user experience. Now, within that user experience score, you've then got the ability to drill into that for some root cause analysis. So, for example, if you can see that user's got a poor experience score because they have a long logon time, then you have the ability to drill into that, and it would then highlight the fact that potentially they may have a large profile, for example. So it may be able to highlight the fact that this user has a 500 meg profile versus the average profile size in the organization is 100 meg. So being able to give you some actionable insights. And I think that's the important thing, rather than just giving kind of numbers and reports. You really want something that's going to be actionable, which kind of says, well, hey, here's a problem, and we're going to give you some guidance as to how you can look to resolve that. So those were the main highlights that we have from Summit. So kind of your workspace intelligence, which is out now, and by all means, please start using it. Like we've said, if you have a workspace entitlement, then you should have access to MicroApps in your cloud management console. If you don't have an entitlement currently, then you have the ability to access a developer account. Performance analytics is currently in tech preview, and it's available as an add-on for virtual apps and desktops customers. If you're interested in having more of a look at performance analytics, please get in contact with your account manager. We can give you kind of more of a deep dive on that and give you a look at more of a demo in terms of what its capabilities are and kind of how you can use it on a day-to-day basis. So one of the things that came up quite frequently while we were at Summit, so hopefully you're all aware that there's currently a vulnerability which affects all Citrix ADC platforms. So this is something that Citrix sent out a notification, or they kind of created a security bulletin on 17th of December, and shortly after they provided a mitigation, which basically protected customers from any potential exploits of that. Now, for one reason or another, that wasn't broadly noticed by a lot of customers. So unfortunately, some customers implemented the mitigation that was available from Citrix, others didn't. Quite a large number didn't, kind of around the world. Now, this all went on fine until around January 8th, when there was a detailed article which basically went over the vulnerability, which was published by Tripwire. So kind of gave people more of an indication as to what the actual vulnerability was, and kind of some pointers as to how maybe it could be exploited. So January 10th, there was some proof of concept exploits available. So this is where security researchers had basically had a look at the vulnerability, and they published some code which could basically be used for exploiting that vulnerability. Now, the uptake of this proof of concept code was huge, effectively. So from around the 11th of January, people and security organizations were starting to see mass scanning of the internet looking for vulnerable systems. So basically looking for any internet-facing Citrix ADC boxes that were potentially going to be vulnerable to this particular issue. There's an article published shortly after where, based on their scanning, they'd found around 25,000 internet accessible endpoints that didn't have the mitigation in place that Citrix had provided. And then on the 16th, we found out that there was some, well, Citrix notified everyone that there were also some SD-WAN WAN-op appliances which also had the same vulnerability. So on the 20th of January, so kind of Monday this week, Citrix released firmware updates with fixes for 11.1 and 12.0 of Citrix ADC. Firmware updates for other versions are due on 24th of January. In fact, I did notice that they'd actually released the WAN-op firmware versions today or last night. So they're really working hard to make sure that they're ahead of the curve on this and kind of actually exceeding their own estimated timescales. I think one of the things I just wanted to highlight is in terms of hopefully you're all in a position where you'd actually put the mitigation in place before or kind of around the time that Citrix kind of notified customers. So this table is just a kind of like rough estimation as to your risk level based on when you actually put the mitigation in place. So if you put the mitigation in place between the 17th and 31st, then basically you're pretty safe. There wasn't any proof of concept code available. So unless there was someone who was working for kind of more nefarious purposes, specifically targeting you, then it's unlikely that your appliances may have been compromised. Again, between the 1st and the 7th of January, there were people actively working on exploit code, but there was nothing public. So you're still at a lower risk of exploitation. Between January 8th and 10th, obviously there was more information in circulation. There were more security researchers actively working on exploit code. So there is a higher risk that your appliance may have been compromised. And if you, from the 11th of January, when there were large volumes of global scanning taking place, then you are potentially at the highest risk of exploitation. So I think first thing I'd say is that if you're in a position where you've not put the mitigation in place or you were late putting the mitigation in place, contact Citrix support. They are geared up. They've kind of tripled their support teams on the 24/7 side to help support customers and kind of work through this. So please do contact Citrix support. They are doing everything they can to kind of help customers that are kind of potentially in a bad situation. I think one of the important things is if you mitigated before the 1st of January, you're at pretty low risk. And again, I want to be careful that I'm not saying that it is no risk. You obviously need to take the precautions that you need to take, but it's a pretty low risk if you've mitigated before 1st January. Before the 8th of January, you're still at lower risk, but Citrix have published a blog with a detection script. So it was jointly developed by Citrix and FireEye, who are a security research organization. So there is a indicator of compromise detection script, which is available. So if you go to Citrix blogs, then there is an article on there. I believe we're also sending out some communications to customers shortly to just make them aware that that's available. So you may want to run the detection script on your appliance. But again, one thing I'd emphasize is that your response to the risk level needs to be dictated by your security posture. So obviously, hopefully you have a security incident response plan in place at your organization. So you would need to make the determination as to your level of potential risk. If you've not put the mitigation in place until after January the 10th, you are potentially at high risk of your appliances being compromised. Due to the volume of scanning activity, trying to detect vulnerable appliances, it's a very significant risk factor. Depending on your security posture, you may want to work on the basis that it's been compromised until you can ascertain that it has not. So a typical recommendation would be for a virtual appliance, you can kind of fairly easily rebuild or redeploy through kind of extracting the configuration from your current appliance and redeploying it onto a new one. So that's certainly kind of a fairly straightforward option. If you have a hardware appliance, again, I would strongly recommend contact Citrix support. They are working very hard to help customers that are either that have found something on their appliances or suspect there may be something on their appliances. So again, contact Citrix support. They are doing as much as humanly possible to help, and as an organization they're extremely focused on making sure that customers are left in a good situation. So that's kind of my recommendation. I thought it would be slightly amiss if we didn't kind of talk about this, because it has been very public, and there have been several kind of news articles which have been published which have had varying levels of accuracy in their information. But I think the important thing to mention is that obviously if you have the mitigation in place, then you're basically safe. There are no known public exploits which will affect your appliance if you have the mitigation in place. So if you put that in place early, then you're covered. So you're in a pretty good place. There are firmware versions being released which contain those fixes. I think one of the things that we are emphasizing to customers is please make sure you go through your normal testing process. Upgrading the firmware or putting the mitigation in place now would not remove any traces of exploits which may have already taken place. So putting the mitigation in place now or upgrading the firmware would not remove any issues that have been introduced as a result of the vulnerabilities. So it's important to understand that just upgrading the firmware would not necessarily remove that type of problem. We would still strongly recommend that you contact support to kind of understand what your current state is, or use the detection script which Citrix and FireEye have released. But yeah, I would strongly recommend you still run through your normal testing procedure. There have been a couple of bugs which have been identified, so quite specific around particular authentication types. So if you're using challenge response SMS-based authentication, there have been some customers reporting issues using that following upgrades. So based on that, we are recommending that customers do go through a normal testing cycle on the new firmware releases, just to make sure that you're not putting a firmware version on to fix a security issue, only to find that you've then broken your authentication. So if you have the mitigation in place, I would say definitely still run through your normal testing and kind of QA and release and change management cycles. It's also useful to have a look at this and say, what can we all learn from kind of this security situation? So I think an important thing to understand, it is possible to subscribe to Citrix security bulletins. So whenever Citrix release any new security notifications kind of across a range of products, it's not just NetScaler or Citrix ADC, across any product, there can be a number of security bulletins released just as advisories, or it may be information regarding kind of ongoing issues or kind of new threats that Citrix have been identified, Citrix been informed about. You can subscribe to those. So on the Citrix website, you have the ability to sign up for notifications when there are any new security bulletins added. So please do so. Important note that customers that reacted quickly to this, so any customers that kind of saw this and put the mitigation in place in short term, are largely safe. They've not had any issues. Another thing that we learned from a lot of customers, make sure your logs from Citrix ADCs are being sent to an external logging system. There are free ones, so you've got like Kiwi syslog servers that you can set up on the workstation somewhere. To make sure your logs are going off your ADC appliances, especially on busy environments, kind of where maybe there's a lot of activity going on. Your on-box logs can roll over very, very quickly. So if there is a need to do any forensic audits or to be able to identify any historical problems, then if your logs are only being maintained on your ADCs, then potentially you may not have logs available to be able to do that level of detection to understand whether or not something's gone on or whether something hasn't gone on. Backups, especially for VPXs, backups save the day. So if a customer has suspicions about their appliances and they had a backup from before the December 17th, this was before the scope of the vulnerability. This was before any information had been released. So if you had a backup from before December 17th, then that would be a safe place to revert to make sure that you don't have any artifacts as a result of this particular vulnerability. So it could either be VM backups, or even if it's just using Citrix ADM, so the ability to do full config backups for appliances to enable you to kind of easily restore to another cleanly deployed instance. And also just an opportunity to have a look at security incident response planning. So what do you do if there's a suspicion that a particular device has been compromised? So being able to understand what data types are at risk and kind of what the recovery process is. This is something where a lot of customers are currently learning and kind of creating these response plans. So being able to do that proactively obviously allows you to put those plans together in a far more controlled environment. So I think one of the important numbers to kind of understand is that these types of exploits happen very rarely. So I think somebody last week did some research on kind of CVE. So basically, a CVE is effectively a record of a particular vulnerability for a product. Now, there's under 10% of all CVEs that have been recorded for Citrix ADC or NetScaler have ever had exploits created for them. So these types of events happen very rarely. So when they do happen, I think it's essential to make sure that we use them as learning opportunities to understand how we can kind of react and respond better should any future incidents occur. So while we're talking about this one, I also want to talk about the next one. So this is something just to be aware of in terms of customers that are using NetScaler or Citrix ADC. So Microsoft are releasing a patch in March 2020. So it basically, without going into details, it changes LDAP behavior on domain controllers. So effectively, any attempt to create a secure connection that's not using LDAPs, so on TCP port 636, will be rejected. So if your NetScalers have got LDAP authentication configured, so I've got a couple of screenshots on here just to show what you may be seeing. So in your LDAP authentication server, if you're currently set to use TLS as your security type, this will be using port 389 by default. So port 389 is non-secure LDAP. However, it can be secured using Start TLS, which is a fairly common configuration because a lot of customers feel that it simplifies the firewall rules. If you have that configured, then you need to change that to use the security type of SSL and using port 636. Now, I would recommend that is done before March 2020 because obviously if there are different teams that look after Citrix ADC and your Active Directory environment, then there's the scope that they could apply the patch which implements this change. And if obviously you're not in a position that's ready for that, then you may be in a position where your LDAP authentication could stop working. So just one thing to note there, just to make sure that everyone's in a good position, so when this patch is released in March, that there aren't any authentication failures. So important to note, if you're going to be changing the ports, you need to obviously make sure that any firewall rules which support that are going to be updated. So if you've got firewall rules to allow TCP 389 for authentication, then you need to add TCP 636 to allow LDAPs connections through. Otherwise, obviously, that would also cause authentication failures. Also, if you're going to go on and check this and you find that you're using plain text, it's probably a good opportunity to have a look at switching to a secure mode. So if you did want to switch to a secure mode, the only prereq is that you make sure that you have certificates in place on your domain controllers. So if you have Active Directory certificate services installed that's AD integrated, then this should automatically distribute domain controller certificates, which would then give you the ability to have secure LDAP in your environment. So that is what I have for today, and I can't see any questions that we've got at the moment. So what we'll do is we'll just hang on for a few minutes and see if any questions pop up. But other than that, thank you very much for joining. Hopefully you all found that useful. If there's anything that you'd like to drill into a bit more, or if you've got any questions, or if you want to know the secret sauce that we can't really talk about publicly, then hey, do get in contact with your account manager. But apart from that, thank you very much, and I'll wish you all a good day.